So Sigurd Lewerentz, born on the 29th of July, 1885, and you can see he arrived at the age of 90. Um, a very interesting case in architecture. So he was born in Sandö in the parish of Viartra in I cannot read this, in Sweden. He was the son of Adolf and Hedwig Matilda. So he initially trained as a mechanical engineer at this University of Technology in Gothenburg. Later, he took up an architectural apprenticeship in Germany. But he didn't really study architecture in a school, I think. He first opened his own architectural office in Stockholm in 1911, so that he was 26 years old, and became associated with the architect Gunnar Asplund, an admirable Swedish architect himself. Truly, these two men are formidable. He also died, I mean, not also, as opposed to Lewerentz, he died at 55. Together, they made a winning entry for the Stockholm South Woodland Cemetery in 1914, 1915. This project was implemented initially by both architects. However, the later stages were done by Asplund alone. He and Asplund were appointed as the main architects for the Stockholm International Exhibition from 1930. But afterwards, Lewerentz became disillusioned. Lewerentz turned away from architecture for many years. And from 1940, he ran a factory producing windows and other architectural fittings of his own design. Sigurd Lewerentz, together with his colleagues Erik Larlerstedt and David Helden, created between 1933 and 1944 what is regarded one of the masterpieces of functionalist architecture, Malmö Opera and Music Theatre. The foyer is considered of particular beauty, which with its open surfaces and beautiful marble staircases, and it is adorned with a number of works of art by artists such as Carl Mills and this Isaac Grünwald. He was awarded the Prince Eugene Medal for Architecture in 1950. In the last decade of his life, Sigurd Lewerentz designed two churches, St. Mark's at Berghagen in Stockholm in 1956 and St. Peter's at Klippan in Scania 1963-1966 that revived his career in architecture. He continued to work at competition proposals and furniture designs until shortly before his death in Lund, Sweden during 1975. Okay, so he died in 1975 and he was born in 1885 on July 29th. This was the man, an engineer indeed, an intense man, no doubt, and his architecture shows it, a serious man. Well, here there is some insinuation of the eyeglasses, the eye frames, eyeglasses, the frames of Le Corbusier a little bit. Anyway, he smoked cigars too sometimes, just like many other important architects, although he was an important, modest architect, I would say, or maybe he was not so modest, but because he is less known, we think, I imagine that he was a modest man. I don't know. But an introverted, I would say, an introverted creator and a very interesting one. Some drawings by Sigurd Lewerentz, sketches and drawings, even ornamental designs, ornamental in terms of graphics, because this is actually the entry project for a chapel in the cemetery in Stockholm that I read about. on which he worked together with Gunnar Asplund. Very, I like this kind of representation, architectural representation. It's so, enigmatic and yet so simple, almost naive. But this is a very sophisticated architect, and we are going to see why. What I'm trying to say is, this is not a rendering, far from it. In a way, it's the opposite of a rendering. But I think the essence of architecture can be very well arrived at and illustrated through very simple means sometimes. You don't need, high-tech, sophisticated renderings with all kinds of seductive trappings. No, the idea is to touch upon the essence of what you want to say and say it as succinctly as possible. Like here. I mean, I also recall the entry of Maya Lin for the competition for the Holocaust, for the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. It was done probably in 20 minutes, the whole project, and she won. And she was a second-year student. So my advice to students is stay away from renderings, from expensive and so-called complex renderings. They're not necessary, and they actually often lead one away from the truth of a project, because you are more concerned with the exterior exterior effects, and you forget the truth of what you want to say, and that's a problem. Again, this drawing is in fact, it only has whatever is there represented, grass or some kind of an approximation of what nature might look like, but in a very both naive and ornamental way. And the building is almost non-existent. I mean, there is some little sketch in the center there, and that's it. And the building was built, and it's a good building. Anyway, you would say he was an engineer, thus he was not very interested in the artistic expression of the building. It's not true at all. He was a very deep artist, and you'll understand why. Yesterday, when I talked about Calatrava, I mentioned his flamboyance, and I also mentioned his watercolors, which are very, very, I mean, they are pretentiously called artworks. In my opinion, I know I could alarm some people, if not most people, but in my opinion, Calatrava is less of an artist compared to Lewerentz, because a true artist is not an illustrator. A true artist is a quester for, is someone who yes, through visual means sometimes, or maybe many times, if we talk about visual arts, is questing for something. And I think he's questing for truth in a way. I mean, look at these sketches on the left. You would say they are not artistic. In my opinion, they are, in the good sense of the word. Now, I don't know if this was done exactly by, yes, it looks like it was done by him, but it's a humorous, this is a rendering, by the way. It's not of my preferred, it's not one of my preferred drawings by him. So he did renderings too. This was done for the the pavilion of Sweden for the international exhibition. I don't know in what year. I personally like more these modest sketches and drawings than the better selling colored ones we saw before. Now, 1912, Unfortunately, in order to, because he is not really a star architect, it's difficult on Wikipedia, the British or the English, American Wikipedia. I couldn't find too many works by him, so I had to go to the Swedish Wikipedia where I took these titles from. Unfortunately, I didn't translate them, and you must forgive me for this if you want. Anyway, we can approximate in some cases. This is a pavilion at the edge of the water, an early work, 1912. So he was 27 years old when he built this. By the way, I love Sweden. To me, Sweden is a superior country in all respects. It is very, very sophisticated. It is civilized. And nature is truly at home in Sweden, but it's also a very technologized country. I had very, very impressive memories from the few days I spent in Sweden. This sense of reticence, the sensitive seriousness, it's nothing made to, seduce you in a superficial way. It's a great quality they have, really. A villa, 1912. But I don't have pictures. 1914, another house. But if you look at the plan, you would say nothing exceptional here except the, the place of fire a little bit, but otherwise it's a very, straightforward plan. Sorry for the resolution of the picture. 1914, another villa. Again, and I know pictures, but we'll have plenty of pictures later on. 1917, this is a housing complex. I like very much this modesty. You have brickwork, which is honestly showing itself as a brickwork. It's not hidden behind all kinds of, so-called finishes. It's, exposed brickwork. And I think we should try to do something. Of course, you need good quality brick in order to do this, but better work on the quality of the brick than to work on the quality of the finishes to hide the brick, which is very noble, one of the noblest construction materials. Frank Lloyd Wright used to say, give me a brick and I'll give you the equivalent in gold of that brick. I mean, in terms of weight and dimensions. A brick is indeed a primal, extremely valuable construction material, aesthetically as well, emotionally as well. Now, this is a famous work by him, a flower shop he designed in 1969. It's, when you look at it, it's almost the opposite of what you would expect from a flower shop. Look at this. It's so stern, it's so austere that it is hard to imagine that this is a flower shop. Here you see the paradigmatic Lewerentz window, where he just comes with a piece of glass and attaches it to the wall. And we'll see other examples of this. I like the austerity of this building, and the surprise you have when you learn, when you know, when you use it, uh, discovering that it's actually a flower shop. I mean, in contrast to the building, the flowers are even more flowers. Again, no finishes, and the pedantic bourgeois would protest, would say, wait a minute, this is ugly, this is gray, this is dirty. I think it's neither. I think truth cannot be ugly if we are courageous enough to face it. In essence, it's just a door and four windows, which are, or three windows, or two windows actually, two windows very large, which are reduced to their very essence. It's just a glass that covers a hole in the wall. Finally, we see the flowers, which again, in contrast to the building, are even more flowers, meaning even more beautiful in the fragility. So what I'm trying to say is that it's possible to use such a strategy in design to have harmony through contrast. This is a detail which is truly remarkable. I think it's very, very beautiful, and it's done in the simplest way. Look at this. He transforms the most basic, well, an aesthetical gesture here. But to take the cables, I mean the pipes outside of the wall, not to hide them within the wall, and play with them in a ornamental way. It's a brilliant idea. I mean, look at this. He creates ornament in this way, and I think it's beautiful. The simplest way. This is literally the simplest way. This is another building in proximity, in the close proximity. He did several works in close proximity, and it's not very clear to me what their function is. But this phase in his work, there are still traces of historicism, as you can see the columns, but otherwise the austerity of the buildings is rather modern. The bell tower, which is a nice structure itself, I think he was a religious man, this engineer, and his last two churches, which are masterpieces, and we'll end our presentation on his works with them, show it. And he was very, very intense in dealing with a function, a church. But you know, this is Sigurd Lewerentz. I know a few other architects from Sweden. Uh, Johan Chelsing, contemporary architect, then Gunnar Asplund, then Ralph Erskine. Well, he was a British architect, but he settled in Sweden and he built significantly in Sweden. So Joseph Frank, also he was born in Vienna, but emigrated um, to Sweden. I think, you know, yes, the individuality of the architects is important, but also important is the cultural climate and the natural context. But you see, even here, the nature is has a is an unspoiled nature. It's not. I don't know if I can express well what I try to say. This country truly respects nature and allows nature to manifest itself undomesticated somehow. And you see it even here, you know, the vegetation is supporting somehow as a background the geometry of the building. Is not a nature that is designed. The landscape is not really designed. It's nature is allowed to breathe by itself through its own rhythms. Although so we saw some of these buildings in this that exist in this site plan. We'll see others also what he did in Stockholm at that Greenwood Cemetery. The chapel of St Borgitta, I don't know, Birgitta or Brigitta, maybe I misspelled, 1918. We already saw a picture of it. An unusual chapel, you know, horizontal, 1 floor height and long, elongated, with the grass behind. But in detail, you see interesting things here. This engineer had really a delicate soul, if I can say so. I mean, look at these very, very discreet touches of ornamentation, you know, and you don't need more actually, you know, but this shows a lot of, yes, delicate sensibility. It's a fine building. It's a fine building in a equally fine natural setting. Now, maybe my love of Sweden is via Ingmar Bergman, who is my favorite filmmaker of all times. Once you fall in love with the movies of Ingmar Bergman, you begin to like everything about Sweden. I think Ingmar Bergman was born on July 14th, so not too long ago. What a film director, incredible, absolutely incredible. I I would even suggest to you to leave this presentation and watch a film by Ingmar Bergman. You could start with Persona, or Through a Glass Darkly, or Wild Strawberries, or Fanny and Alexander, or Autumn Sonata. My God, every film made by Ingmar Bergman is absolutely incredible. And he made at least 40 films. A magician, truly a magician, Ingmar Bergman. But there is magic work here too in the work of Sigurd Lewerentz. I don't know, the poetry of the Swedish spirit is very, very seductive for me. The Chapel of St. Knut, 1936. There are traces of what might be called neoclassicism here, as there are also in the works of Gunnar Asplund, his colleague, so to speak, a truly very, very important architect in Sweden, and not just in Sweden, but for modern architecture, Gunnar Asplund. But Sigurd Lewerentz also has, at least in some of his works, the ones we look at now, built before the war, there are touches of certain kind of neoclassicism, but very abstracted, you know. And actually, this work was renovated by Johan Chelsing, an interesting contemporary architect who also works from Stockholm. This very, very unassuming architecture. So it's very interesting that yesterday I talked about a very assuming architect, that is Calatrava, and now we talk about an architect who is very unassuming. Now, this truly formidable, no, maybe the word formidable is not correct, but if you arrive in Sweden, if you arrive in Stockholm, I think you should not neglect to visit this very beautiful woodland cemetery. He worked at the beginning with Gunnar Asplund here, then Asplund completed most of the works. But it is a remarkable architectural experience to visit woodland cemetery. The Chapel of Resurrection, this is, we saw the project for it. Another chapel was built by Gunnar Asplund. At this stage, my preference goes for Gunnar Asplund, because the engineer Sigurd Lewerentz was perhaps a little bit too attached to cultural models in a literal way, and but he will evolve. We are going to see. There is majesty here too. It's an, I mean, yes, we have the columns that are brought into this time and present time, you know, from the past. But the austerity of the volume and its strict geometry is, you know, rather modern. Now that I look at this plan, I almost feel like saying that the proportions of the plan of this chapel are somehow similar to the proportions of the, you know, the church at La Tourette by Le Corbusier, or the the space where the liturgical activity takes place, which is very, very impressive. I would say that La Tourette is more impressive than Ronchon. Although the geometry is rectangular, is simple, but I know what I felt when I visited. It's just incredible. So you can do a lot. And actually, you know, really, I see now a lot of similarity, even in terms of the proportions of the section with the church at La Tourette. This is smaller, of course. But the proportions are similar. Malmö Opera House, about which we read that it is considered a masterpiece of functionalist architecture. You know, it was built before the war and during the war. It ended the construction in 1944. Malmö also has a building by Calatrava, of which I talked yesterday. In my opinion, a very well done twisted tower. Malmö, a very interesting city itself. This is not one of my preferred works by Sigurd Lewerentz. In my opinion, his last two works, the churches, one in Stockholm and the other one in a town whose name I forgot, in my opinion, are his best works, and will arrive there. Here he worked with two other architects, as we read. This was done, you know, 80 years ago. This church in Stockholm is a very interesting building, and I'm glad we arrived at it. After over a decade of absence from architecture, Sigurd Lewerentz reappeared with the creation of St. Mark's Church in Berghagen, Stockholm. His winning design for the church brought him back to the art of building, and his apt control of materiality brought the St. Mark's Church international attention. Lewerentz received a commission for St. Mark's Church through a competition. He was invited, along with 4 other architects, to propose ideas for the new church. Lewerentz submitted multiple ideas and was ultimately chosen as the designer for the new church in 1956. St. Mark's Church is located in a suburb of Stockholm, Sweden. The two buildings on the site are set amongst a grove of birch trees with little connection to the surrounding, I guess, suburbs. This is the church, and I mean, look at the lamps, lamenting lamps in a way. I think it's very beautiful what we look at. The trees are beautiful, the lamps are beautiful, the materiality of the brick wall is beautiful. It's, again, it's an architecture which is poetical, unassuming, with a genuine modesty, but this modesty does not succumb in mediocrity. Truly, I think it's a shame to cover a brick wall with anything, because the brick is earth and it's clay, it's earth, and we shouldn't hide it, you know, in the name of so-called protecting it. No, we have to find ways to expose brick with its nobility, because it's a very noble material, yes. Good architects never hide brick with anything. Look at this. This is beautiful. It is an artwork in itself, just a picture. And what do we have? We have just the materiality of the brick wall, and that's it. And yes, we have also the, you know, the tree, but the wall is beautiful because it has multiplicity and unity, and it doesn't have any. There is no need for you know, superficial seductions here. I like very much brick. Now, of course, a church being the house of God, uh, you know, many people think it has to be animated by a certain degree of exceptionalism. But you can arrive at this exceptionalism in different ways. Now, some people might think that this is not perfect. You know, these lines are not perfectly, I mean, straight, and but I think there is poetry exactly because of this. You know, that you see the human hand, a human hand which is not indifferent, but it's not trying to achieve the perfection of the machine. You know, the world has the life of the hand that made it possible. And there are very interesting details here. And, you know, I mean, really, this is a remarkable building. And we are going to see one even more remarkable after this one, also a church. just like in the case of Alvarado, here Sigurd Lewerentz shows himself as being a very subtle great master. I mean, look at this window, look at this entrance. It's poetry. It's architectural poetry, done with simple means, but not simplistic. It's medieval and modern at the same time. The vault, the window. These are, almost paradigmatic Lewerentz windows. Frank Lloyd Wright said that architecture would be very easy to do if you wouldn't have to make the windows. Indeed, the windows somehow complicate matters. You have to penetrate the wall, you have to make an opening into the wall, where to make that opening, and how big, how tall, how wide. Indeed, it's not easy, and the complications are more in a way more challenging the more you think about what is a window. Because the window is through, I mean, through the window takes place the dialogue between the inside and the outside. Of course, it takes place also through the doors, but you have usually more windows than doors. I mean, relating to the outside. I love the ceiling here. It's the roofing. It's structural. It's complex. It's simple. It's both. Actually, the the ceiling became an organ because it's architecturally is musical. Actually, the ceiling sings. It's structural, but it's also ornamental. So this is in Stockholm, in a suburb of Stockholm. In my opinion, this is his best work, St. Peter's Church in Klippan. I love this work. So the Church of St. Peter in Klippan is the last major work of Swedish architect Sigurd Lewerentz and embodies a holistic and obsessive architectural vision. The church manages to sit independent of style and tradition, quietly questioning and subverting a multitude of architectural and constructional norms to form a deeply imaginative and particular building. Klippan is a small town in southern Sweden. St. Peter's at Klippan sits in a suburban setting on the periphery of the town. The orientation of the church is correct, with the altar standing opposite the west doors. It is square in shape, suggesting a more intimate ritual in the tradition of circumstance standing in a circle, which harkens back to early Christianity. I like this very much, standing in a circle of early Christianity. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that tradition is pale today. You know, to stand in a circle, equidistant from the center where God is supposed to be. So even if the center is not populated, so to speak, the idea is that, you know, we are all equal, equidistant from a center, which is supposed to be the divinity we are honoring. So I think early Christianity had intuitions which perhaps should be considered very seriously today as well. This was the religious equivalent of the search for the essential and the primitive, strongly evident in both of Lewerentz's later churches. We saw one of them previously. These characteristics are expressed beautifully in the detailings of the buildings, the choice of materials, the quality of light, and the spatial articulation. Certain parts of the building might not make you think that it is a church. And this I like because it's about the connection between house and church, between the profane and the sacred. I like this intimate dialogue between the two. And I'm thinking also of the book by Mircea Eliade, The Sacred and the Profane. Here there are some very subtle details, if we are to call them so, that, I mean, look here, you know, you almost have, you know, the structure is also playing the role of the cross, which is so important in Christianity. It's really magnificent because with this, you know, apparently simple means which are structural, he also achieves symbolic and ornamental design of the highest order. Here it was a mature architect in his later part of his life, meditating through architecture about life, existence, death, God, us. There is drama in the ceiling, in the roofing, but again, it's an unassuming drama, if I can call it so. It is a reticent drama. I know it's oxymoronic what I'm saying, but I like this very much in Sweden. You know, in general, is this ability they have to not over dramatize. Very interesting, these skylights here, you know, very narrow. So I guess light doesn't have to flood space in order to be symbolically relevant. Again, the brick symphony, or at least the brick sonata. This one, this image was actually from the previous church. They are similar, actually, in some respects, the two churches. Very interesting how, you know, the windows, because of the lack of a frame and the reflections that it allows because of the quality of the glass, they become almost the beautiful artworks on the wall, continuously changing. So the house of God, the church, is also the house of man, because man and God are correlative. And this is what we see here. It is the house of God, but it's also the house of man. And look at this. I mean, you know, without words, he says a lot here. He says a lot about the limitations of life, the fragility of life, the end of life. But also, I mean, I personally, this moves me very much. You know, only a poet, an architectural poet, could do something like this. You know, it's very subtle. It's very evocative. It makes you think. It makes you feel. I mean, the grandiose gestures of Calatrava do not have this kind of subtlety. This is a different kind of architect. He's not trying to impress. He's simply employing the means of his art, architecture, to evoke what he felt and what he thought. And brick everywhere, brick on the ceiling, brick on the walls, brick on the pavement. I will say something outrageous now, but I believe in what I am saying. What we look at here now, this little detail, so to speak, in my opinion, is more valuable architecturally than the big cathedral being built in Bucharest now. Just this little detail says more about faith and about life and about God than that huge building. And look here, you know, with, again, the brick is miraculous. You know, you can do so much with bricks of various sizes, and they are all united by the fact that they are all clay, burnt clay. The same material, but different configurations, different sizes, but it's the same material. It's domesticated earth in a way, you know, earth brought in the shape of a brick by the human hands. Lewerentz was an architect, but he was also a builder. Then you saw that it's very easy to decipher how he built his buildings. His buildings show how the building came into being, how it was built. I see in this building great reverence. It is reverence for the life of the spirit. It is the reverence towards the function of the building. It is reverence for faith, reverence for God, reverence for life, death, beginning, birth, rebirth maybe, but it's a complex work, and it is simple and yet complex. And the musicality of the building is present both on the ceiling and on the floor, as you can see. A very sensitive work. The mourning lamps. What an interesting idea to make a lamp which is mourning. You know, it gets a human quality somehow. The lamp is mourning, and we saw them already. We see them here in somehow the shadows are even more mourning than the objects themselves. You see, with very simple means, you can achieve a lot if you think seriously and sensitively. Thank you, and happy birthday, Sigurd Lewerentz.